Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. New York Times best-selling novelist Eric Jerome Dickey coined that phrase, but many of us live by it. We tie clocks to our wrists. We view punctuality as a sign of godliness and consider promptness to be a fruit of the Spirit. But is it? Is it ever better to be late? Is God ever late? If you have ever wondered why God didn't respond to your prayers in a timely fashion, you will want to listen in to Nathan Norman, Vicki Hitzges, and Kent Edwards as they discover why for God, late can not only be acceptable, but preferable. Welcome to CrossTalk, a Christian podcast whose goal is for us to encourage each other to not only increase our knowledge of the Bible, but to take the next step beyond information into transformation. Our goal is to bring the Bible to life into all our lives. I'm Brian French. Today, Dr. Kent Edwards, Vicki Hitzges, and Nathan Norman continue their discussion through the Gospel of Mark. And if you have a Bible handy, turn to Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43 as we join their discussion.
Nathan, Vicki, does it ever bother you when people are late?
Sometimes.
It bothers the dickens out of me, assuming I'm there. Yes, assuming I'm there. I have a friend who is always late, and I mean always. She's 15, 20 minutes late. Always. There's never a time she's on time. And it's so disrespectful. And I've been friends with her for 15, 20 years. She's never once been on time. It just bugs the dickens out of me. I remember saying to a boyfriend about myself and saying, I'm sorry I'm late. And, I was maybe 5 minutes late, but I kept him waiting. And he said to me very graciously, he said, Vicki, a punctual man is a lonely man.
Wow, that's fantastic.
That is a good one. I find it interesting in different parts of the world where we do crosstalk. People have just a very different sense of time.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, I'll say, yes, we're going to start at a certain time, and everyone shows up, depending on the culture, 15 minutes late, half an hour late, sometimes an hour late. Late by my time, by their reasoning, that's good enough. That's pretty good. That was what was implied. But certainly, for many of us, in the Western world especially, time matters. We want people to show up on time. That's true for our friends. That's true for God. When we call out to him, we expect him to answer the phone. Has God ever been late for you? Did he ever arrive, but not as soon as you would have liked?
Oh, I would say that's his MO. He's like my friend.
Wow, how Christ-like of your friend.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's times where I've the finances for, a bill or whatever has come after it's been due. Mm-hmm. Or looking for a place for the church to meet, right? And then you finally make a decision, and then, a week or two later, something absolutely perfect shows up, but it's
too late.
It's too late.
I remember a lady from Houston coming and speaking at a church, and she said, God is never late. He is never late. He misses a lot of good opportunities to come early, but he is never late.
It kind of reminds me of that line from Lord of the Rings where Gandalf, you're late. A wizard is never late. He always comes when he intends to come.
That's true.
But we often feel that God has come late.
Yes.
If that's true for us, I think it's also true with a man named Jairus. In Mark chapter 5, one of my favorite stories of the Bible is with this man. The story begins in Mark chapter 5 in verse 21. Vicki, would you mind just setting the opening scene for us?
Oh, absolutely. When Jesus had crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. And then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him.
Now, here we learn two important facts about Jairus. He's the leader or ruler of the local synagogue, and he's the father of a little girl. Nathan, how do these facts build the tension of the story?
Well, being the leader or ruler of the synagogue, he is a highly, highly respectable person, right? And so he's also kind of a unofficial politician. He's got to play the part. He's got to look the part and respectability. And here he's throwing himself at Jesus' feet. This isn't something that happened. I mean, we see it often in the Bible, but we have to remember that this is utterly humiliating. I mean, just think of yourself right now. Like, throw yourself at the feet of your kid's teacher, of your principal. Go throw yourself at the feet of the pastor to ask him to unlock the church an hour early, right? Like, we just don't do that in our culture, and we're not even a shame-based culture. So this was utterly one of the most humiliating things you can do. And he's public. So all of the people who come to his synagogue, they see this guy shaming himself, humiliating himself utterly publicly. It means he's desperate. He is utterly desperate. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what his what political price he has to pay. He is desperate because he has this little girl. And as I'm sure is true back then, as it is today, as most fathers can attest, is you love your boys, but your little girls own you. That's true of my life, and I'm sure it was true for him. And he says she's dying. So he doesn't matter what respectability he throws out. It doesn't matter how many political points he loses. It doesn't matter even if he loses his place as the leader or ruler of the synagogue. All that matters is the life of this little girl. He will humiliate himself in front of everyone.
Yeah, and you're very right. And as he does so, isn't it also acknowledging that he's seeing Jesus really as the Messiah?
Yeah.
Yes, that's amazing.
At this point, like, Jesus is kind of on the outs. His own family was against him. And so now he's so desperate, he's going to go to Jesus, who his friends and family members and compatriots are saying, oh, this guy's crazy. Shut him up.
Right. So this is an act of really saving faith. I mean, he's trusting that Jesus has the ability to do this. He's throwing himself at his feet. He's trusting in him alone for this situation. And that's costly. As you mentioned, there's religious implications. He loses his position of influence, his position of respect. He's an outcast. He becomes almost an enemy of the faith within his own community. That would obviously have economic consequences.
Yeah.
If he works for someone else, why would you want to have an employee who is an enemy of the faith? In that little community, no, you'd lose your job. If he had his own business, who's going to go buy groceries from an apostate Jew? I mean, that would have economic complications. Socially, nobody wants to deal with him. And I think it has some family implications. You just know that Jairus' wife is behind the scenes, telling him, you better solve this problem. This is our little girl, our little angel. I don't know what you have to do, but you're the father, do something. And he's leading the family down this path. And he comes and throws himself at his feet. And Vicki, you read it, but what is Jesus' response?
He agreed. He said, okay.
That would be encouraging, wasn't it? I mean, just as it is for us. Jesus promises to give us our daily bread. He says, if anyone is sick among you, we have the right to come and pray for healing. Jesus makes wonderful promises for us, just like he did with Jairus. But the strange scene follows. Vicki, can you summarize what happens next in verses 25 to 30 after Jesus said he would come?
Sure, I'll read it. It says, a large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman who was there, who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. And yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and he asked, who touched my clothes?
So, I mean, that's wonderful for this woman, right?
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Yeah, suffering. There's no medical solution. She touches Jesus, and she is instantly healed. I mean, that's a great day for her. What follows is a little bit disconcerting for Jairus. Nathan, what happens in verses 31 and following?
You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering."
Imagine you're Jairus. You've undoubtedly been running a long way to come to Jesus. Throw yourself at his feet. My little girl is dying. This is urgent, right? Yeah. And Jesus says, yes, I'm coming. And then this woman touches him. And what does Jesus do?
He stops.
We need to do an investigation. I want to know who touched me. The emphasis in the text is that it's a large crowd, and the disciples' reaction, all kinds of people are touching you.
Who cares?
And who cares? And how are we going to find this person? Right. Years ago, I was speaking in southern India to a huge crowd. I was the first Western speaker they had ever had. People have seen me know that, I'm white, and I'm 6'6". So I kind of stand out among a crowd of small people. I mean, by their request, I had to wear a suit. So a white, tall guy from North America, I was the subject of attention. So when I finished preaching, I had this group of bodyguards around me that were trying to help get me out to the van with this, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were there. And the problem was the people, again, had kind of a magical opinion of God, and they wanted to come and actually touch me. All these hands are reaching out towards me, and the bodyguards are trying to keep them away, but there's no way they can do that. So you can imagine what I felt like when I finally got to the van. There's no way I could identify any one person who had touched me. That's what seems to be happening. It seemed to have happened to Jesus. All kinds of people were touching him. And he stops, labors, and talks with her, and ministers to her. How old was Jairus' daughter? We find about this later. How old was she?
12.
How long has this woman been suffering?
Same amount of time.
Yeah. So, with all due respect, I think if I'm Jairus, I'm saying, Jesus, it's time to triage. In the same way when you go to a hospital, if you've got, a broken arm, you don't get in before the person with a heart attack. The person with the most urgent need gets dealt with first. For crying out loud, if I were Jairus, I'd be saying, I feel for this woman. It's wonderful that you touched her, but she's had this for 12 years. She can wait one more day. My daughter can't wait. And you promised to come. Please come. Do it now. Do it now. And Jesus takes his time. And as the tension rises, some people arrive on the scene in verse 35. And he hears the words he did not want to hear.
It says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?
How do you think Jairus felt right then when he heard those words from these men?
Angry and frustrated.
Yeah. Why?
Well, because he'd messing around asking who touched me, and you would think, of course he'd know. So why dilly-dally? Go. Why didn't you heal my daughter?
Right. It's as if the ambulance is taking the aneurysm person to the hospital racing, and they see a kid scraped his knee falling off his bike, so they decide to stop and help. Right? Are you kidding me? Just keep going.
Yeah.
And he's paid a price. The price has been paid. He sacrificed his reputation. He's put his faith in Jesus. I think Jairus feels betrayed. Absolutely betrayed. You told me you're coming, and then you stopped.
And the depths of embarrassment and humiliation.
Do we ever feel like Jairus did? We've asked Jesus, and he dilly-dallies around, worrying about fulfilling Middle East prophecy or working in people around the world, but doesn't have time for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel it for myself. I feel it for some of our church family in the fostering system where you have a kid that has been neglected or abused. Neglection is abuse. Mm-hmm. And the court is just doing nothing. And they are bent on returning this kid to their abusers who can't even do the basics that they're required to get the kids back. And yet the courts still say, well, no, we're going to give you 4 more months. We're going to give you 5 more months. Meanwhile, traumatizing the kid over and over and over again with these visits that they don't want to go on. And with this just long sense of trauma. And I can remember with our own daughter just praying and angrily, driving down to some of these court cases that I had to go to and shouting at God in the car, like, come on, do something, show up. And then you go to the court case and they're like, yeah, there was a typo here on this form. So we're going to come back in 3 months and figure this out in 3 months. Yeah. And then driving back going like, what are you doing, God?
I think when Jesus said, don't worry, have faith in me. Let's keep going. I think at that point, if I were Jairus, I'd be saying, look, why don't you stay behind? Enough embarrassment is enough. Right. You're already too late. But Jesus follows with them. Together, they head for his home. And it doesn't get better when they get close, does it? I mean, Vicki, look what happens in verses 38 and following.
It says, when they came to the house of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him.
Of course they laughed. You don't need a medical degree to know if someone's dead. Poke them in the eye. Do they react? Are they cold? His rigor mortis set in. I mean, come on. Any peasant on a farm can tell if someone's alive or dead. And he says the child is not dead. If I'm Jairus, I'm embarrassed. I have just thrown myself in front of someone who is making a fool of me. And I think at that moment, he ran past the mourners and ran to his wife. I know it's not in the text, but I'm convinced he did. Why?
To comfort her.
Because she was there. She would have been there by her daughter to the very end. With cold claws, with homemade remedies, whatever she could do to try and save her daughter. And she had the trauma of watching her own daughter breathe her last breath. She would have washed the body, put her in fine clothes, and laid her on the kitchen table. And I think Jairus ran to her and tried to comfort her. And I'm pretty sure I know what she said to him. When he finally showed up and put his arms around her, what do you think she said to him?
Why didn't you come sooner?
Yeah, I told you to run. Why are you so late? And how Jairus would have responded, like any man, he would say, it's not my fault. Don't blame me. I went to Jesus. I did my part. He said he would come, and then he stopped. It's all Jesus' fault. Do you think she cared?
Nope.
No. You were late. Our girl is dead. I mean, this has got to be one of the most depressing moments in the Bible. But then Jesus acts again. And we read in verse 40 and following, the most amazing thing happens.
He said, after he put them all out, all the people, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the little girl was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around.
Can you imagine the emotion in that room? I mean, if you were standing in the corner, you were one of the disciples who were there, and you were just watching, you'd see Jesus walk over and perhaps put his hand on her hand and see the color begin to come back in her hand and spread across her body, to see her eyes begin to flicker and open. And what would you see in Jairus and his wife when she actually got up and walked around?
Tears.
Astonishment and relief.
I mean, the weeping, the crying for joy, the hugging to see if this is really true, feeling the girl's forehead, are you really warm again? have you really come back? Imagine the thanks to Jesus. Wow, this is beyond anything we ever could have imagined. But there would be a question, right? What would be the question of the parents at the end of all this?
It's the universal question of why. Why did you take so long? Why did you come late? Why did you make us go through this pain?
Right. If you're gonna heal, why would you not have done it earlier? You can heal from a distance. You can do anything. Like, you could raise the dead. If you're going to restore our daughter to health, why did you wait so long and have us go through such emotional turmoil and difficulty all this time? I think that's what we ask of God often. Thank you, God, that I'm in remission of cancer. So why did I have to go through all this chemo? Why did I have to? You could have touched my body and solved this a long time ago. Why did I have to go through this journey? God, I've been praying for a job. You know, in COVID, I've lost my job and the bills are paying up, and I've been praying and you promised daily bread, and thank you for the job, but it would have been nice if the paychecks had come before I lost my house. It would have been nice if my kids could have stayed in school. Why did you wait so long? God, why were you late to keep your promise to me? I think that's our question often. I think that's the question that Jairus and his wife must have asked. And that's why I pay such close attention to the end of verse 42. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. And at this, what does it say in the text? At this, what?
They were completely astonished.
I think for them and for us, when Jesus delays, he does so to amaze. Look how much greater this miracle was than if he had healed her earlier. Look at the insight they had into his character, the appreciation they had for this gift. How much greater was this demonstration of Jesus' power than it would have been earlier? Because of the difficulty they went through, they got a glimpse of Jesus and his grace and his majesty they would never have had otherwise. This kind of reminds me of when you go to a jeweler to look at a diamond. If you ever do that, most jewelers, every jeweler I've ever been to, will take out a piece of black velvet, put it down on the counter, and place the diamond on top of the black velvet, because it's against the utter blackness of that velvet that you can best appreciate the beauty of the diamond. I think in the same way, our gratitude, our appreciation, our understanding of God's greatness increases when it's placed on the top of the bleakness of a difficult time in life. Vicki, I agree with you. The statement you made earlier, when you quoted a friend as saying, God is never late. His timing, I believe, is always perfect. He's sovereign. But it is sometimes seemingly inexplicable. But I'm convinced that as we wait for Jesus to keep his promises, and he always does, that when God delays, he does so to amaze us with his goodness and his grace.
When we face difficult days, we can do so with confidence that God will keep his promises. And when he does, we will realize that he has delayed in order to amaze. I trust that today's discussion of God's Word has been helpful and served as an encouragement to not just be hearers of the Word, but doers. Together, let's bring God's Word to life, to our lives this week. The CrossTalk podcast is a production of CrossTalk Global, equipping biblical communicators so every culture hears God's voice. To find out more, or to support the work of this ministry, please visit www.crosstalkglobal.org. You can also help support this show by sharing it on social media and telling your friends. Tune in next Friday as we explore why God often makes ministry unnecessarily difficult. Be sure to join us.